A Sebastian's Mind movie review.
Today's review is for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, directed by Andre Overdahl and produced by Guillermo del Toro, and is an adaptation, sort of the young adult novel trilogy of the same name, which were all written by Alvin Schwartz. They were a series of horror novels that essentially were like an edgier version of Goosebumps. And before anyone asks, yes, I actually have read these books before. I don't exactly remember when I first read them, but I do believe it was somewhere around 2005 to 2006. Because, I'm not an 80s or 90s kid. I was never around at that time. It wasn't until 2001 that I finally came into the world. In fact, I'm 18 right now today. But anyways, yeah, I actually had the books at one point. I don't have them anymore. And okay, you know what? Fine. To tell you the truth, I didn't actually read the books. I actually had the audiobook that was narrated by George S. Irving. Yeah, I was young. Yeah, I was at that back then. I was at that age where I would be too lazy to just read and prefer to just listen to something or watch something with my ears. Heck, I'm pretty sure at the time my ability to read wasn't even entirely complete. Anyway, when I first heard these books, a few of the stories did make me a bit on edge whenever I tried to sleep at night. Harold, The Red Spot, Something Was Wrong, Is Something Wrong, Wonderful Sausage, those stories gave me the chills when I was younger, especially with the absolutely haunting illustrations by Stephen Gamble. Heck, some of the artwork is even scarier than the actual stories that they were drawn for. But what I never did think to expect in my life at all out of these books was that these books would be made into a feature-length movie, which at some point I did imagine, but I had my fill of that when I first discovered the YouTube channel Moonraven, where he or she actually made 3D animations that bring the stories to life with audio from the original audiobooks. And even looking back at them today, they are still pretty creepy and disturbing. Even the fact that the animation is pretty dated, since it was like 10 or 7 years ago, today, it just makes those videos even more disturbing.
As she soaked herself, the boil burst. Out poured a swarm of tiny spiders from the eggs their mother had laid in her cheek.
But anyways, it wasn't until earlier this year, when the Super Bowl came along, did I eventually find out that they were actually adapting the Scary Stories into a movie with Guillermo del Toro in the producer's chair. So of course, I got excited. And I was also surprised that they didn't make it an anthology movie like Creepshow or Twilight Zone or something like that. Basically, they went for a mature version of the 2015 Goosebumps movie, where the stories actually come to life in the movie's universe. The movie is about a group of kids who go to a haunted house and they find a book of scary stories which belongs to a woman named Sarah Bellows. And they find out that the stories are actually literally writing themselves, like literally. And it sends various monsters from the original scary stories to go after various characters in the movie. And of course, our main characters, Stella, Ramon, Augie, and Chuck, all have to find out how to stop it. And it's all done in a genuinely pretty satisfying film that I found myself enjoying very much. Not just as its own standalone horror movie, but also even as a way of adapting various stories from the original books altogether. It was a very creepy and eerie film that also has a lot of pretty funny humor to lighten up some of the mood. Like, I actually found myself feeling for the main cast of kids. Stella, Ramon, Augie, Chuck were all very likable characters. The film doesn't waste any time to try and develop them. And when you watch the movie, you definitely think to yourself, "Aw man, I would hate to be him in this situation." My favorite out of the four kids would have to be Chuck. He was definitely the more humorous aspect of the movie, and I thought he was great. Even when he doesn't say anything, he has these pretty funny reactions that do quite get a laugh out of the audience. I love the main characters. I found them all to be one of the most heartfelt and most in-depth aspects of the movie, and I really hope these kids get some awards out of this. They all really deserve it. I was also really impressed by Andre Overdahl's brilliant direction. He films this movie with such a dark and very intense style, with the camera movement and the atmosphere of the film. Whether it's day or night, it really keeps you into the movie. Serious props to Mr. Overdahl. He did a wonderful job directing this movie. Also, let's get this out of the way. I didn't mind them making it PG-13. I heard a lot of people talking about how this is stupid and how it should have been rated R. And to all those people, I just need to say this. You do realize that this movie is based on a kid's book, right? Meaning that despite being one of the most disturbing books ever written, it was made for children. So of course they'd want to make that same sort of appeal with the movie as well, so they can also make it for a somewhat young audience. So stop complaining, it's really not a big deal. It's made for today's generation of young horror fans, like many people when they first read the original books. It only makes sense. And besides, even without a bunch of gratuitous gore and bloodshed, they still find some very effective ways to scare the viewer without it being too completely bloody and gory. Basically, they do it like The Conjuring. Like it actually frightens you. This is definitely a movie that I'm pretty sure will scare any elementary school kid that goes to see it. Much like how the book did to some of us when we were all much younger. And speaking of the books, I just gotta start my mega fanboy mode as I talk about all the amazing ways they brought the various monsters from the original stories to life. Harold the Scarecrow, the Pale Lady, the Toeless Corpse, the whole crew behind this movie did such an incredible job at making them look very much like the original Gamble illustrations, particularly with the Pale Lady from The Dream. I would not have expected for these guys to actually try and make her look this much like how she did in the art of that story. I would have imagined something more like how Moonraven designed her when they made a short for The Dream. But no, they basically took the art and pulled the characters right from the pages, and they did it spectacularly. But there was also a new monster they introduced that was made specifically for the movie called the Jangly Man, who is actually a combination of two creatures from two of the different stories, Meitai Dodie Walker and What Do You Come For? And you know what? I'm gonna be honest. Despite the fact that he's definitely not exactly a character from the books, although they do kind of creatively enough try to make it out as if he could have been, I honestly found him to be the scariest part of this movie. The effect they did of him contorting his body reminded me a bit of that scene in 2017's It when Pennywise crawled out of the fridge in front of Eddie. Except here, it's like if it were dialed up to 11 and filmed with an even more scarier monster. Seriously, out of all the monsters, I think the Jangly Man is probably my favorite out of all these in the movie. I loved all the monsters that this movie included, whether it's ones from the book or just specific ox that were made for the movie. They did an amazing job bringing these nightmarish creatures to life. There were pretty much only really two problems that I had with this movie at all. Like, for one thing, there were times where the CGI was a bit off, like whenever they did use CGI. Specifically in the scene where they interpret the red spot. It's scary, but at the same time, I also can't help but think about the way they affected the spiders. I feel like a bit more work could have been put into the spider effects. Also, I feel like the movie was a bit rushed. Like, I felt like it could have been a little bit longer. Like, when they find out what's going on, it's when the second incident involving the book is occurring. And it just felt way too quick, to be honest. But despite those issues, I do absolutely think that the movie version of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was a genuinely scary and also a pretty funny film that has a really good cast, a great use of PG-13 horror, brilliant direction, and it brings these monsters to life in some very spectacular ways, which I'm sure will have any kids who see it in the theater today have trouble trying to sleep for days. This was a damn good horror movie, and I absolutely recommend it if you're a fan of the original books, or just a horror movie fan in general, no matter what rating it has. I'm going to give Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark an 8 out of 10. And I also hope it doesn't go down like John Carter, where it just bombs, despite the genuine talent that's behind it. If that happens, I'll just be sad. I want to see this make money. Seriously. I seriously want people to go see this in the theater. Please do so. And if you do, we might even get a sequel on our hands where they could probably adapt Wonderful Sausage or High Beams. That'd be awesome. Well, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I'll see you next time, and peace out.